We're now moving on to look at medicine, health, and healing in the Muslim tradition. And just to be clear, this was the tradition that proved to be the most challenging in terms of finding information, at least in English. I really had to search high and low in libraries all over the place to find anything at all in English. So this, of course, doesn't mean there's not lots of material. It just means that I didn't have access to it as I don't read Arabic. So this is a field of study where I really hope there are scholars working. I think people that work in Islam have been kind of preoccupied with other issues, as we know from just looking at the world around us. But I do hope that in the future there will be translations of more texts into English and more work done on this topic. But for now, we're going to work with what I was able to discover and the sort of larger concepts of the tradition and how it views health. As you already know, all the world's traditions have some understanding of health and connect it to spirituality and religion in some way, and certainly this is true of the Muslim tradition. So I'm going to look at some aspects of the tradition in early Islam and the idea of prophetic medicine, and then in the next lecture I'll be looking at the development of ideas of medicine and the doctor. As well as mystical Islam. So when we look at the early Muslim tradition, of course, we have to look at the development of the tradition itself, which is monotheistic, and some of you will likely already know is genealogically related both to Judaism and to Christianity and recognizes itself as such. So as it says in your textbook, the Quran, the holy book of Islam, recognizes and reveres the figure of Jesus, the figure of the Virgin Mary, many of the prophets of the Hebrew Bible, including Noah and Moses. So Islam understands itself within the context of these monotheistic beliefs and sees itself as related to Judaism and Christianity and views them as people of the book. Of course, they believe that their tradition is the sort of the end of all of those monotheistic traditions, that it contains the greatest amount of truth. But certainly within traditional Muslim societies, Christians and Jews were referred to as people of the book, and they had a special status within the community. And so I can look at this more as we get into the medieval period. Certainly Jewish doctors tended to be treated much better in Muslim majority countries than Christian ones, and we can look at that when we get to that. But I want to start with at the beginning, which is with the Prophet Muhammad and the holy book, the Quran. So again, many of you will probably know that within the Muslim tradition, it's not permitted to use images of God or of the Prophet Muhammad. So obviously I'm not giving you any here. And so the text, it's more about the text. So typically in a mosque, for instance, there will be calligraphy, and the kind of the artistic aspects of Islam come out largely through things like architecture. Although some traditions do have painting, but you would never depict God or the Prophet Muhammad. So as I say in the textbook, the Prophet Muhammad is the paradigmatic figure of the tradition, just as we see the Buddha in Buddhism and Jesus in Christianity. So when the tradition is trying to figure out its attitude to something, they will look back to that figure as being the sort of the perfect Muslim. So what would Muhammad do in this situation? So we're told that within the Quran and the Hadith, that the Prophet Muhammad was known to heal his followers. Now, this is a complex topic. There's not the same focus as we see in Christianity on things like healing miracles, but it is in there that Muhammad has some of these powers. It's not emphasized, and certainly the Muslim view of health, as we see across cultures and religions, is that disease can be the result of a variety of causes. That's one thing we see in common across all of these traditions, is there's no one cause. So sometimes from a Muslim point of view, the problem is just strictly natural, and in other times it's associated with something religious, so kind of malignant energies like jinns, or it can be moral failing. So this idea that you would cure your illness through adjusting your spiritual life. So again, we've seen that in pretty much all of the traditions, this complex understanding of what causes illness. And certainly because Islam is Abrahamic and has this belief in the ultimate power of God, that the basic idea is that only God knows it's not up to human beings to decide what's the cause of the illness. It's up to human beings to have compassion and help treat it in whatever way is deemed necessary. So this early form of medicine is called medicine of the Prophet. And as I said, we don't have a lot of information on this. I'll talk a little bit more about this when we get to the slide. I just want to look at a section of the Quran here. So the Quran is believed to be a revelation from God given to the Prophet Muhammad. And so we hear, surely you, the Lord God, who created the heavens and earth in 6 days, then sat himself upon the throne. So anyone familiar with the Jewish or Christian tradition will find this immediately recognizable. So the idea that God creates the earth in 6 days. To him shall you return. God's promise in truth. He originates creation, then he brings it back again. So this idea of God as creator, that he recompenses those who believe and do deeds of righteousness justly. So the idea that anybody who follows Islam properly and does good deeds and acts with justice and mercy is going to be rewarded by God. So this is obviously very familiar to people across tradition. So the idea is you go to the Quran, you go to the Hadith, which is the kind of the testimony about the life of the Prophet Muhammad and the early community for your clues regarding how to be a good Muslim, and also connected to that, how to stay in good health, both physically, mentally, and spiritually. So Islam, like Christianity and like Buddhism, actually was a proselytizing religion. So it was converting people, and so its beliefs are laid out quite clearly. So we see this is often rendered as the 5 pillars of Islam, the basic aspects of behavior and practice that make somebody a good Muslim. So the first one, shahadat, profession of faith. So the person in front of Muslim witnesses will say there is no God but Allah and Muhammad is the messenger of Allah. Very simple. So just the profession that this is what you believe, and so that would make you a Muslim if it's done in the proper way in front of witnesses. Salat, obligatory prayers 5 times a day. So some of you may know about this. So this is the idea that many traditions have sort of morning and evening prayers, but Islam's a bit more rigorous here. So you can see that if somebody's living where they're a minority in a country that the majority of people aren't Muslim, that this can be very challenging for them, because you can see that what this does is it creates a situation where everything in your life is centered around religion, not the other way around, that when you have time you do religion. So you have to make time and space for it. So in the Canadian setting, this has resulted partly obviously because of the Charter of Rights that prayer rooms are provided in various public spaces. Now this is under direct attack in Quebec right now. They're trying to make public prayer illegal. So anyway, I'm watching that with interest and alarm. And so typically, if any of you have been to or have lived in a Muslim majority country, there will be calls to prayer 5 times a day, and so everybody's participating in it. There's a muezzin, and they just say the call to prayer, and everybody can go. Either they do it at home, they can do it anywhere, or go to the mosque and pray. Zakat, charitable giving, traditionally a percentage of one's earnings. Again, this practice is very common across religion. This has been understood. I hesitate using the word charity because it has the sense of if I feel like it or if I feel moved to give it. But within the Muslim tradition, the idea is that it's more like a tax. It's you owe it. So it's not that you watch a commercial and you feel bad and then you give money. It's that you have to all the time be giving part of your earnings. Now they're very clear that this should not put your own family in danger, but if there's extra money, that it should be given for the good of the community. And so in many Muslim societies, this became basically a tax that was put towards the public good. And we'll be talking about the ways that that plays out in terms of health and healing in one of the other slides. Some fasting during the holy period of Ramadan. So again, you will know that practices like fasting are very common across culture. The Ramadan fast, which goes on for a month, it moves throughout the calendar. It's a lunar holiday. And this fast, there's no drinking water or eating. It's a very challenging fast. And I've worked with people who are practicing this. Very difficult in a non-Muslim setting because, you're expected to work just as normal. So this is a very demanding practice. So again, if it's a Muslim country, it's easier. There's a sense that things slow down, and the whole society's kind of functioning around this challenging fasting period. So I've heard it explained in various ways across culture. Certainly from a Muslim point of view, it's the idea that fasting is a religious practice that we see Jews and Christians undertaking, but also the idea that it's meant to make you think about those who don't have enough to eat. So it's connected into the charitable giving as well. So the idea that being grateful for having enough. Hajj, pilgrimage to Mecca. So this is expected of any believing Muslim, if they can afford it and they're in good enough health, that they take at least one pilgrimage to Mecca. And so millions of people go on this pilgrimage every year to Saudi Arabia. It's the holiest city of the tradition. And when people pray, they pray facing Mecca, so facing east. So as with most of the world traditions as they develop, and as you can see from your textbook, I have a short description of the tradition. There's over 1 billion Muslims in the world. So unsurprisingly, there begin to be divisions within the community. And so the three main ones that I want to touch on are Sunni, Shia, and Sufi. And so Sunnis make up the vast majority, we think around 900 million. And so they're the majority outside of Iran, Iraq, Azerbaijan, Bahrain, and perhaps Lebanon. We're not sure exactly the numbers in Lebanon, but the majority of Muslims are Sunni. And so this is a very long topic, and we're not studying Islam itself, but it has a lot to do with beliefs around who leads the community. And so the Sunnis believe in the 4 rightly guided caliphs. So these caliphs were elected, okay? And so it's not coming down through blood relations to the prophet. So I'm going to be focusing on this community because this is the one we have the most information about. This community believes that the leadership of the Muslim community, or Ummah, the worldwide community of Islam, should be traced through the family of the Prophet Muhammad. So this is kind of believing in the blood lineage of Muhammad, and this part of Islam also creates the Ismaili community. There's quite a large Ismaili community within Canada. Then we have the Sufi, the mystical path within Islam. And so this one cuts across all of the other forms of Islam. And I will be talking about this more in relation to health and healing in a little bit. But certainly the Sufis have sometimes gotten into trouble within Islam because the mystical path is much more about kind of personal revelation. And so as in the Christian tradition, the idea that you can get your own mystical revelation it creates a certain amount of tension. But this tradition has been extremely influential and continues into the contemporary period. So as I said, within Islam, there's it's not permitted to depict God in any way. So obviously the tradition has to engage with God. So how did they do it? One of the ways is through what's called the 99 names of Allah. And so it's said that the first pillar is Iman, or faith. So faith, as with all the Abrahamic traditions, is absolutely central. The word Muslim actually means to submit to God, to have faith, and to have trust in God. And so one way of kind of understanding God is through what's referred to as the 99 names. And so it's said that these names are repeated throughout the Quran. So this becomes a very common way that Muslims will then relate to God and know God. And so these names can be memorized and recited by believing Muslims. So, and it says in the Quran, and to Allah belong the best names, so invoke him by them. So you can't depict God, but you can invoke God through these names. So you can. I've just chosen one here because it's relevant to the topic that we're looking at. But you can see the calligraphy. So this is Arabic, the liturgical language of the tradition, regardless of where in the world it is. And so you would say the names in Arabic. And so I'll just give you some examples and then we'll come back to this one. Al-Rahman, the most or entirely merciful. Al-Malik, the king and owner of dominion. Al-Hadis, the absolutely pure. As-Salam, the perfection and giver of peace. Where am I here? Al-Jabbar, the compeller, the restorer. Okay, so you can see that these attributes, completely recognizable from any religious tradition, that these things that are associated with the divine, and then Al-Shafi, that I'm showing here, the healer. So this is getting at the idea that from a Muslim point of view, health and healing always come from God ultimately. So this idea of Tawheed, the unity, so the unity, God is one, and so there's no health or healing outside of the divine. Now that doesn't mean that you can't go to a doctor. So we've talked about this at the very beginning of the course. This is one of the kind of misnomers many people have who don't understand religion, and they have this idea in their head that religious people just believe in faith healing. Now that can happen in certain traditions, but generally, the vast majority would view a doctor as being kind of the hands of God, right? They're the way the divine comes in to help people. So I'll be talking about this more when I look at medicine and doctors within the tradition. But certainly the overarching idea is that health and healing comes from God. So the earliest form of medicine is called Tib an-Nabawi. And so again, I was unable to find anything in English directly on this. I've read what I can in English, and it's viewed as a medical system coming through the Prophet Muhammad through revelation. And it's said on one site, an unparalleled cure for both the healer and the afflicted, addressing the needs of the sick and the healthy alike. So this is similar to the idea within Buddhism that there's nobody that gets out of life unscathed. And so these kind of teachings are for everybody, anybody who's suffering either mentally, physically, emotionally. And it's interesting to me to see, this made me feel a bit better about having such a struggle to find material, that one of the sites was saying that even though now Ayurveda is so well known and homeopathy, etc., this form has tended to be ignored. So I don't know the historical reasons for that. It may have to do again with the kind of the political history that has happened and where the tradition has put its energy. But we're starting to see people getting interested in this again, and I would predict there are going to be many, many more works done on this in the coming years. So the idea is that there's an intrinsic connection between the soul and various afflictions of the body. Okay, so that's the basic wisdom of this. And so any form of health and healing has to do with the soul and the divine. So that's not surprising from everything I've been talking about throughout this lecture. And so one of the sayings is, the prophet said, there is no disease that Allah has created except that he has also created its treatment. And so you can see this is kind of cultural permission for a variety of forms of medicine. So it's up to human beings to discern and figure out how to heal based on any practices that don't fly in the face of the teachings of the tradition. So it's a pretty open ticket in terms of the religion, that anybody who's attempting to heal, the prophet himself did it. It's a way of showing mercy, which is an attribute of God, that healing is an attribute of God, and so it's well within the kind of orthodoxy of the tradition. And again, unsurprisingly, we see the practice of prayer that's connected to health and healing. We've seen this already across many religious traditions, and particularly the Abrahamic traditions of Judaism, Islam, the idea of specific prayers for healing. And so I pulled this off a hospital website. O Allah, the sustainer of mankind, remove the illness, cure the disease. You are the one who cures. There is no cure except your care. Grant us a cure that leaves no illness. Okay? And so we can see that the Muslim community is participating along with all other communities in terms of what we would call chaplaincy within hospitals and so on. And so this idea that you can say prayer is obviously a fundamental mode of the Muslim tradition, and so the idea of praying for health of oneself or the community would be a central practice of health and healing. So I want to conclude this lecture by looking at an overarching concept that I think often gets left out when looking at the Muslim tradition, which is the connection with social welfare. And so we can see, going right back to the words of the Prophet Muhammad, that he was extremely concerned with the well-being of the vulnerable within society. And so this has been part of the tradition, the idea that you have to take care of the vulnerable, so the widow and the orphan. And so the zakat, the tax or the almsgiving, is meant to be partly for that. But another way that this plays out is in the building of hospitals. And I'm going to be talking about that when we get to the next lecture, because building of hospitals is the way this sort of works its way out into the real world. And so another idea that is related to this is seen here. The parable of their believers in their mercy and compassion for each other is that of a body. When any limb aches, then the whole body reacts with sleeplessness and fever. So I came across this actually at a conference where scholars were presenting this idea of the idea of the diseased limb, is how they described it. And so this is the concept that all Muslims are connected as in a body. And so if anyone is in pain or suffering, the whole community is in pain and suffering, and so they have to attend to it. So this is related to the concept of the Ummah, which is that Muslim community that goes beyond international boundaries. So we can see presently with Gaza, I'll just give an example. The Red Crescent Society is the Muslim equivalent to the Red Cross Society. So it goes into any war-torn regions, but has particular obligation to other Muslims. And so with this current, the ceasefire seems to be holding. We can only hope. But with the war in Gaza, for instance, we see the whole Muslim world is concerned with this. And so this is the idea that everybody is connected within the community and they're responsible for each other.